Jai Hind, Jai Bharat, and welcome to Dev Talks. This is Aadi. We need to understand what India is trying to do with regards to China. What is it that is India's policy against China? There has to be detailed discussions on this on various different aspects and various different angles, if I may. This is one of the first ones. I'm going to start with Major General Vivek Sehgal, who's going to give us his thoughts with regards to how does India handle China going forward in the future, in the near term, and probably in the little long term as well. So, firstly, hello and welcome to the shows. You've been here before as well, and the viewers really liked your straight shooting approach. So, I hope to get some of that today as well.
Thanks, Adi. Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure being with you on the show, and I hope I can contribute meaningfully.
I'm sure you will, sir. Let's begin, sir. At the end of it, the biggest threat from China is the military threat, which is on the border. There is asymmetric and this and that, which is obviously there, but the biggest physical threat from China is the military. Uh, their aggressiveness with regards to construction, with regards to prodding around, in spite of the fact that a bloody incident took place in Galwan, has not really stopped. How do you see India looking at handling the military aspect of it with regards to China, sir?
Adi, I'll request that I'd like to go back a bit to
Sir.
be able to put the Chinese endeavors or desires or aims in the correct perspective. I think we need to look at two questions. First is where is China coming from, and second is where is China heading. Now, very simplistically, if you look at where China is coming from, it has a very rich strategic culture behind it. Over a period of time, it has been able to get three narratives institutionalized within the country. That is the Middle
Mm,
Kingdom mindset, the mandate of heaven, and of course the century of humiliation. To go a step further, the Middle Kingdom mindset also links to a hierarchical order of things in as far as the Chinese are concerned. Now, when you look at that, where India figures in the Chinese realm is that in the Asian hierarchy, China is reticent in accepting a peer competitor. So, to that extent, there is going to be friction between India and China because India is also growing in the same strategic space. This aspect needs to be understood. When we look at the century of humiliation, the Chinese have been talking about it. It primarily pertains to the period when the King dynasty was weak and the foreigners were able to put across very forcefully and draw certain concessions from the Chinese. So, this has ingrained a sense in the Chinese polity that for a strong nation, a strong armed forces is a must.
mm,
Mao's dictum of power flows from the barrel of the gun uh, is apt, and therefore the modernization efforts that you see, which the Chinese have made over a period of time, will continue as technology keeps maturing. The third aspect is the mandate of heaven. Now, simplistically, mandate of heaven means that the ruling dispensation continues to enjoy the support of the populace till as long as it is just and it meets the aspirations of the populace. The Chinese CCP does not have a legitimacy like a democratic government. Therefore, the CCP has, in effect, made the economic prosperity of the Chinese nation as a medium for its legitimacy. So, any problems in as far as economic prosperity or any dangers or threats to the economic prosperity of China is likely to be contested very, very aggressively. So these are some aspects that we need to look at. Now, if you look at economic prosperity, uh, you realize that China has been an export-oriented country.
yes, sir.
It requires resources which have been coming from abroad. It requires trade with nations far and wide, which again traverses the high seas. So, therefore, a maritime orientation for the Chinese was very important. Now, take a step back, and you realize that China has about 14 neighbors, or rather more than 14 neighbors, land neighbors. It is basically a continental country, though of course it has a vast coastline. So, for a somebody has rightly said that for a continental power to be able to switch to a maritime orientation, it is very important that that power exercises hegemony along its continental periphery. The Chinese have settled their boundary disputes with Russia, with the other Central Asian republics, with everybody except India and Bhutan. The other countries are small. Russia is embroiled in its own affairs with Ukraine. So, therefore, there is not much of a threat from that direction. India, with its infrastructure development and its desire to ensure that the northern borders are adequately protected, has become an irritant in as far as the Chinese are concerned. And to that extent, I feel that the aggressions, the continued transgressions that are taking place, one after the other, is with the aim of keeping India on tenterhooks. Now, that is one part of it. Second is, where is it headed? After Xi came to power, he very categorically said that he is looking at rejuvenation of the Chinese nation. Now, rejuvenation of the Chinese nation implies primacy in regional and global affairs. It implies influence both regionally and globally. And it also implies primacy of CCP, that is the Communist Party, to ensure that this dream can come true. Now, if you look at it from this point of view, you will find that, as far as the primacy of the Communist Party is concerned, stability, economic growth, which is tantamount to state control, which is what we've been witnessing over the last decade or so, and strong armed forces are important imperatives to ensure that primacy remains. The clamping down on the internal, the people, curbs on internet, curbs on social media, etc., is all in sync with this policy. While initially, uh, when after the fall of the Soviet Union and the U.S. Involvement in the war on terror, there was space that was created which China wanted to exploit. So it remained, it followed Deng Xiaoping's dictum of biding your time and not raising the hackles of anybody and ensuring that you keep a low profile. But over a period of time, I think after Xi has come to power, he has realized that the time has come when this strategic period of opportunity that was existing is slowly and gradually shrinking, and China has amassed adequate economic and military muscle to be able to throw its weight in regional and global affairs. So this is how, I mean, this is one thing that we need to look at. Now, if you look at the few things that Xi has done, first is BRI, second is restructuring of the PLA, third is centralization within the country, fourth is re-education and internal control has been strengthened within the country. The COVID pandemic, though a serious crisis, was used as an opportunity to try and do this salami slicing in the South China Sea and increasing pressures across the along the Indian line of actual control, etc. So
Mm-hmm.
these are certain issues that they have done. I'd just like to, sum it up by saying that, like we said, regional primacy is one of the aims of for achieving rejuvenation. Now you
Right.
find that while in Central Asia, because of smaller countries, this is feasible. India has become an irritant in this aspect.
Diversity of
So,
India, sir.
yeah. So this is one aspect where India becomes an irritant. The second is the maritime power. Now, again, like we said, China needs to be a hegemon. That means it needs to secure its continental borders to be able to focus on the maritime domain.
Hmm.
With India where it is, and with the dispute as it is with India, and India's growth, both economically as also the uh, efforts to modernize the armed forces, it remains an irritant in this aspect also. The third issue is influence. Now, China has been leveraging, we discussed this in the earlier podcast also, where we said that China has been leveraging its economic muscle with the aim of developing client states in the immediate neighborhood and the extended neighborhood, as
Extended.
also the continents of Africa and Latin America. Here again, you know, India becomes an irritant because India has a fair amount of soft power projection amongst the global south. And India sort of gives out an alternative model to the Chinese model for the global south to emulate. Now, my
True,
take
sir.
is that in an environment where you're looking at a multipolar dispensation at the global level, every pole will look at developing a constituency of nations which will help to further its agenda in a multilateral forum. China has been doing this, but India's hold on the global south and India's attractiveness within the global south, as also now with the developing world, is likely to impact the constituency that the Chinese have. Take the example: China is going the Oceania. India is now making inroads into Oceania. They are finding an alternative with India, so they may not necessarily remain totally aligned with the Chinese. ASEAN similarly, the countries may wean away from China if India is aggressive enough in partnership with them. So these are
Hmm.
certain dynamics that we need to keep a
Understand.
watch.
Hmm.
Yeah. So I just wanted to start with this as a precursor, that when we look at what the Chinese want and when we look at what the Chinese are doing in their foreign policy, I don't think there is a mismatch. They are bound to do these kind of activities. We have to find ways and means to ensure that we do not get totally stymied by the actions that the Chinese take. As far as the military issues with India are concerned, uh, as you are aware, the military modernization has been on since the 80s. It has been helped on its way by the stupendous economic growth and the financial clout that the Chinese were able to garner over a period of time. The modernization has been very, very comprehensive. Uh, they've been, I think, very, very wise in the way they've modernized their armed forces by initially creating pockets of excellence because they could not naturally provide the technologically advanced infrastructure or uh, wherewithal to the entire armed forces, which is very large. So they created pockets of excellence. They started practicing in swift movement of these pockets of excellence to anywhere along the Chinese border. They started training these pockets of excellence, maintaining these pockets of excellence at par, so that should a crisis develop, they have adequate force which can be mustered from various military regions at that point in time to the point of conflict. Moreover, what needs to be watched is that they have been following the recent wars that have been fought by America in Middle East, in Kosovo, etc. And they have realized that technology is the answer.
Makes yes, sir.
Unless they develop technologically, they will always be playing second fiddle to everybody
Second
else.
fiddle. Hmm.
In addition to this, if you see that while for some time the acquisition of weapons and modernized equipment was dictating the doctrine or development of doctrine, we have now reached a stage where the doctrine is dictating the technological investment that needs to be put in into the armed forces to be able to achieve the aims of the doctrine. Today, the Chinese are talking of intelligence-sized warfare. This is primarily come about because they feel that they are front runners in as far as AI, data, what do you call this, data computing, etc. The new technologies are well within their grasp. Another issue is that they started developing their infrastructure along the Tibetan border well in advance. And my take is that as the infrastructure developed, the number of transgressions
Will
and
increase.
the frequency and the strength of these transgressions tended to increase, because
Yeah.
where earlier only 10 people could go self-contained, now maybe 50 could go in vehicles. So that is where it has resulted. But then transgressions are, I would say, not so much of an issue, because they can happen because of the different perceptions of the LAC.
LAC itself. Hmm.
What is more of concern is the incursions that are taking place now, be it Doklam, be it in eastern Ladakh, be it in Demchok, DBO, etc. Because incursions have a political bias. They are sanctioned by the politicians. And in the Chinese case, PLA and the polity, the they both reside in the under the same head. So that becomes a case of concern. As far as India is concerned, I mean, we started late, but we are picking up in a big way. We have made inroads, which in itself is also, a source of concern. And as far as the Chinese are concerned, there have been number of cases where the Chinese have objected to our infrastructure development,
Oh,
and standoffs have taken place because of that. Suffice to say that the 2020 standoff, the Indian Army has reacted well. It has poised. It has built up in the area of concern, and a stalemate has now come about. But this stalemate is at a cost, and that cost is in maintaining the troops in that kind of a terrain over prolonged periods of time. Now, with the purse being what it is, if more money is going to be spent on maintenance of troops which are already existing on the border, then lesser amount is available in the kitty for modernization and acquisition of new weapons and equipment. So that is something which we have to juggle with as we move forward. I hope I
absolutely,
have
sir. No,
been
no,
able
you
to
brought
answer.
out something very interesting. So I must say the historical aspect of it is not something that a lot of people know about even. Because I mean, I recently was reading a transcript which was about a conversation between Nikita Khrushchev, his team, and Mao Zedong and his team, who met in Russia somewhere around the Lanzhou incident, which is about 1959, 1960 odd.
Yeah.
And I mean, the way the Russians and the Chinese argue about India, that, why, what is the reason? Why are you doing this? Because if you want to fight the West, India is the best bet, and this and that. That's what the Russians had to say. The Soviets had to say at that time. So history, and when I read through that, it made me understand that the Mao Zedong's responses with regards to India were very vary. He himself didn't know what they wanted out of India. And what you've kind of described is also a very, very interesting, aspect of it, that they need to do what they're doing to achieve what they want to achieve for themselves, without which it doesn't make sense, because acknowledging a growing India will not be in their favor. So, the biggest acrimony which is put across towards the government is trade. We've seen a slowdown in terms of the trade, although just about 1 or 2%, if my figures are right. Uh, Having said that, there has been a lot of effort to wean ourselves off critical supplies that could hamper, uh, could harm certain industry if there is a sanction or something like that. As a matter of fact, Chinese also passed that foreign affairs law where they said that we will sanction and we will use this sanctions in countering any such trade issues. How do you see this thing going forward, sir? Although it's a far gone conclusion even for the Western powers to kind of completely cut off China. It started with decoupling, now it is de-risking, and I'm sure as we go forward, another word will come out. But how do you see India's policy with regards to trade? We need it, but how long do we need it for?
Again, like you rightly said, I mean, after the Galwan issue, we did take some steps, very nascent steps, to try and curb the Chinese inroads into the Indian market. But if you look at the volume of trade, even after that incident, the volume has
Massive.
grown,
Yeah, yeah.
and the kind of imports that we get from China are actually swamping the Indian market. Vis-a-vis the kind of exports that we are doing to China, there is a huge trade deficit that continues to exist. The Chinese are very, very reticent in terms of, you know, giving market access to the Indians. But at the same time, they also want the raw materials that the Indians are providing for their pharmaceuticals and other things. So I think, awareness has come about, especially after the COVID, where not only India or China, or for that matter, the United States, every country in the world is looking at an ability to diversify its, the supply chain, so that the supply chain does not get stymied should a conflict situation occur with the country. You must have an alternative in place. So that is one issue that I feel is important. I do not think we can really de-link ourselves from the Chinese
Of course.
trade per se. Trade will continue as it is, and as the Chinese have been saying that put the border issue on one side and let's continue with the other things. Uh, while we may not want to do that, we've been saying that normalization of relations cannot happen unless the border issue is put in its correct perspective and sorted out at the earliest. At the same time, there are certain areas over which we have no control, and I think trade happens to be one of them, where we do not have an alternative available uh, for meeting our demands, I would say. So gradually things are moving, but I think that is my sense of how the trade part of it is going to play out.
No, you brought out something very interesting,
Point I
actually.
would like to
Hmm.
mention is the Chinese talk about the strategic period of opportunity
Hmm.
from when the Soviet Union broke up, US overextended by
Yeah.
war in Iraq, as also in Kosovo, as also in Afghanistan, the economic crisis that emerged thereafter. So all these issues provided China with uh, an opening, which it cashed on, and everybody else latched onto it to ensure that their economy does not falter. The Chinese aggression, aggressive stance during the COVID in South China Sea against Taiwan, against the Indians, increased inroads into Asia Pacific has resulted in the United Nations taking notice of the fact that China is growing too big, and if something is not done, probably it may be too late. Now, this has in effect created a period of opportunity for the Indians, where the United States, the West, other ASEAN countries, everybody is trying to look towards India to be able to, you know, become an alternative to China to some extent. FDI coming in, manufacturing, alternative manufacturing hub being created in India if we get our act together in terms of reforms. All these are issues that are coming up. Technology transfer that the recent visit by the Prime Minister to US has ensured, the willingness of France in dealing with us and as far as technological upgrades are concerned. All this is an opportunity that we should not miss. And this period of strategic opportunity may not be as long as the period that was available to the Chinese. We need to cash on this, and I think what we are doing is a step in the right direction. We must draw the maximum out of it in the short time that it is available. to be able to bridge to some extent the technological gap that exists between China and India, both in the armed forces as also as countries.
You said something very interesting, sir. If I may also add a humble to it, one thing that I understand, you've kind of hinted to it, and I'd like to kind of put it out in the open. But the factor that when we increase a lot of the what do you call the trade from China, it is also the factor that you're buying stuff for your own industry so that you boom up. If you don't do that, your own industry will be in slowdown, and your entire thought process that you're talking about, the military and this and that, everything goes into a tangent. So it's like a very, very vicious circle, but you got to run through it and outpace it so that you can get out of it. Uh,
Yeah.
that's the only way I would look at it, because
And it will take time. It is not
it will
something which
absolutely,
can,
absolutely,
it's not like a tap that you switch it off today and everything is hunky dory thereafter.
absolutely. So, what about diplomatic efforts? I mean, do you see a change in stance from India? We see a calling out of China happening more often than what it was before. Although at the highest level, a lot of people blame Prime Minister Modi not for taking China's name. But I ask such people, when has Xi Jinping taken India's name? It's not a pointed acrimony that both the countries are into. But having said that, there is a strategic competition that you brought out very clearly. How do you see both the countries handling diplomatic efforts, and what is India's plan for a? I mean, it's a game, so a one-upmanship.
Again, I mean, as far as diplomatic efforts are concerned, the my take is that the best diplomacy is continued diplomacy.
So
I mean, it is something like you just don't stop talking to each other.
yeah.
That has to continue. And more importantly, like you rightly said, you don't have to name names. Uh, People are intelligent enough to understand about whom you are or whom you are referring to. So certain signals have been sent across, and I'm sure the Chinese know whom we are referring to, and we know whom the Chinese are referring to. And more importantly, it is the one aspect of diplomatic relations is physical engagement with the Chinese per se. And second aspect of diplomatic relations is relationship with everybody else who matters. Now, whether
Hmm.
it is the United States, whether it is Quad, whether it is our dealings with France, whether it is Vietnam, whether it is joint exercises with Japan, Philippines, all these are, in a way, signals to an intelligent adversary that, okay, this country is also growing, it is finding greater acceptability, and the reason for this greater acceptability may rest in my actions. And therefore, I need to probably scale down my actions to ensure that this acceptability does not become a threat.
Ah,
If I've been able to put it across in a reasonable manner.
no, that
So,
is, I think,
so,
yeah, absolutely, sir.
so this is
Absolutely.
how we need to view the diplomatic relations. I mean, we are talking to the Chinese. The Chinese, wherever the meetings have taken place between the foreign minister and their foreign minister, the leaders are also likely to meet now in the G20. So it is okay. And I think another issue which has always been figuring, I think one very important aspect of diplomacy is to agree to disagree.
Mhm.
There are certain issues on which we do not have common thought process, but we agree to disagree and continue forward without raising too many hackles. That is how it is going on. And like, but the finance minister very categorically said that there is a limit up to which our relationships can go with
Hmm.
the standoff as it exists on the border. And if you want full normalization of relationships, then please come and settle the border issue, or at least the existing demand of reverting to the status quo prior to 2020.
True. That's where my kind of last point comes across is about the pressure tactics, sir. uh, we are seen taking a singular stand, saying that, boss, as you said, status quo ante, and that's just about it. You get back to this, we'll start talking in. And in the recent meeting also, Wang Yi, Incidentally, I don't know why he's dealing with us when he's left the foreign ministry, or he's become the big daddy of the foreign ministry, if I may. Uh, he also said the same thing, that we need to keep the border issue separate, and we need to kind of de-link these. If I may just take 30 seconds, historically the Chinese always, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I read some writings from the time of Mao, which hint to the factor that historically the Chinese feel that whatever they're doing in terms of their sensitivities and this and that must be respected by everybody in Asia. That includes India, of course. But whenever India does bring about any of its sensitivities, it is considered as a local and a regional problem, not very important, and it is considered to be a factor that, why are you bringing that up now? We're trying to make the Asian century here. What's wrong with you? That sort of a situation. Uh, is this the similar tactic that they are trying to follow? Is to, I won't say delegitimize, but not really recognize India's sensitivity as far as the border is concerned, and keep it away, because this is something that they've been doing since history. So I'm just trying to make sense of the change in narrative from the Chinese, from saying, "Oh, all is well, all is well." Now they're saying, "Okay, leave that aside. Let's talk about something else," sort of a thing. Why are they doing this? Is this they're just following
I
history? Is
think
it?
again, I think one way of looking at it is right from beginning, the Chinese have been talking about leaving the border as it is to be settled
Yeah,
later on,
yeah, yeah.
okay? And let us grow together in the globalized world, so to say, and reach meet our aspirations,
Hmm.
which has been going on for quite some time. And at the same time, after we opened up with them with Rajiv Gandhi's visit and with Prime Minister Atal Bihari Vajpayee's visit and the confidence building measures coming in place, uh, the special representatives meeting for border resolution, all these talks, everything has been going on, but no major headway has been made. So, in as far as the dispute is concerned, I think the Chinese recognize this as a dispute. They also recognize that it is not going to be that easy for either the Indians or for the Chinese themselves to resolve this dispute, because it will involve certain amount of give and take, which for any political dispensation is not the best way out. But more importantly, they have earlier felt the need that they required a country like India to be aligned with them to project a common front on various issues in a world which is dominated by the developed world,
Yeah. Develop also.
developed world. So therefore, uh, like that cliche of strategic engagement with India and tactical, uh,
Pressurizing.
accretion
Yeah.
as far as India is concerned has been the norm. Uh, I feel that the current invest that has taken place and the current standoff that is there is, there can be two three reasons to it. One, of course, is India's increased infrastructure construction. Second is the proximity of the area to the Karakoram and the CPEC, so to say. Third is India getting closer to the United States. So this could also be a means of sending a message across that this is a
Stand.
bilateral issue. Let's sort out our bilateral issues. The more you get into somebody else's camp, the more difficult the situation is going to become for you. So something of that sort appears to be what is going on. And I feel that if you look at it, the aim is to ensure that India does not grow beyond the subcontinent. And like we talked
Hmm.
last time, the best way of doing that is to propagate to project Pakistan, or proper Pakistan, as a counter to India, which unfortunately uh, has lost its relevance to quite an extent because of the current situation in Pakistan. Hobnob with the Indian neighborhood, you know, the string of pearls, incursions and intrusions on the border. All this is designed to ensure that India's focus remains within the subcontinent and along its territorial boundaries, and it does not have the or does not give the kind of impetus that is required to the maritime domain till it is too late and it is again playing catch up in the maritime domain. So that is how I see it.
Can I just ask you a follow up on this, sir? What do you think
Hmm.
the Chinese strategy towards India is? Is it more tactical in nature, or is it a strategic strategy where, as you described, they look India as a piece in the game that is being in the larger game that is being played? When they that I can understand, but when they deal with India, is it a strategic strategy that they are following, or is it just that, oh, now you sat down with the US, now we do something? Is it a tactical sort of an approach?
No, I feel I mean, you're right. The Chinese have always looked at India as uh, for its action interactions or relations with the countries that matter to China. You know, there was a time when China was close to the USSR
Yeah.
and America was the enemy number one. So, if India was drawing closer to America, it was a threat to the Chinese, and
Hmm.
Chinese ensured that that does not happen, and they tried to wean India away and keep it away from the United States. One. Subsequently, there was a period when the Soviet Union they had a fallout with the Soviet Union. India became closer to the Soviet Union, became a source of concern. So they were looking at India as a friend of the Soviet Union, two adversaries on their immediate borders.
In
Now, now,
you've kind of, sorry to
now
interrupt you, but
again,
you've been able to tickle their fancies every time. Yeah, either it was the US and India,
yeah.
then it was Soviet Union and India, now it is back to US and India.
Now
So
it's
we are
back
like
to
the
US
bad
and
boys,
India.
huh? All the time.
Yeah, but I think the time is changing. I think now with the growing Indian economy, the efforts at modernization, the resolve that has been depicted by the polity has all sort of brought to the fore the fact that India has now become a source or a country that needs to be interacted with as an individual and not as a supplement to some other country. So I think we will see that over a period of time, relationship between China and India is going to become more and more, and they would like to keep it bilateral. They would not like to
Yeah.
uh, make these issues into multilateral issues.
Hmm. Hmm.
While
Hmm.
the endeavor will always be to ensure that India remains, I mean, it is growing, they cannot stop it, but it sort of accepts its place in the hierarchy of things, and China continues to hold sway in Asia. That is what their endeavor is going to be,
Fantastic.
and that is what we are looking at countering.
It's I love talking about China, so because at the end of it, it's a mystery that you can actually dwell into. Pakistan is easy like a book. Anybody can become a Pakistan expert. But when you want to talk about China, you gotta read, you gotta understand, you gotta refer this that. It's fun. It's actually interesting, and I'd like to actually thank China for waking us up towards the threat that it provides to us. Because before that, I think the general society was in oblivion with this giant dragon sitting on our shoulder. We never really thought that there was be this kind of a threat, but and
Yeah.
I say this pretty openly. Thank you, China, for waking us up. Now you've got a lot of millions of Indians going to read about you, know about you, and probably figure out a way to counter your actions. So, sir, I must say thank you so much. It's an enlightening discussion. Firstly, and secondly, the historical aspects that you brought about always given that extra edge to the China discussion, because the Chinese are like that. Chinese think like that, just like us, because they're a civilizational nation. One needs to understand their history to understand their actions today. As usual, sir, my congratulations for bringing it out so beautifully, and I'm looking forward for many more such discussions for us to understand the knowledge that you've yearned in your career, and so that it can benefit us youngsters to actually take this beautiful country of ours into the future. Thank you so much, sir. Till next
Thanks
time.
a lot, Ari, and it's been a pleasure as always to be interacting with you. It not only, it's sort of like you rightly said, uh, talking is the best way of getting your thoughts into perspective.
Absolutely.
So the more one interacts in this kind of a forum, the better it is for me as an individual also to be able to crystallize my thoughts and put them in some sort of a chronology that makes sense. So I think to that extent, it's been nice. And like you rightly said, China is an issue that needs to concern everybody, and I'm sure everybody is concerned. There is a talk by a lot of analysts saying that the Chinese economy is slowing down. The Chinese population is not very receptive to the CCP, and things are not likely to continue the way they have been continuing so far. And the CCP's draconian steps to keep the populace under control is going to backfire at some point in time or the other. I think this aspect needs to be studied in greater detail,
Yes.
because from this will emerge themes for, let's say, information warfare,
Ah,
that can be utilized to ensure that there is a leverage that we have vis-a-vis the Chinese on some point.
absolutely, sir.
So that is how
Absolutely,
I
sir.
see it, and we need to maybe the next time we'll talk about something like this. No?
Absolutely. Because of China discussions are, I mean, mostly done on news. Oh, China mein ye ho gaya, so let's discuss it. No, you gotta actually have build on this discussion. And I'm actually trying to do a series of these discussions where I'll take many people's opinions and kind of sieve it into something where, you know, we can probably understand China a little better. Because
Yeah,
previously, when
and
I saw shows on China, it was not that popular. Now I found that audience who's interested to know about China. People have started reading about China, so it's nice to actually see the audience also getting more and more involved in this entire game. So it's fun, sir.
thanks, Hari. And I'll just request you, in case you have some good discussions on China that you conduct over a period of time, just flag them to me so that I don't
Absolutely,
miss them in the whole lot of them that you take out on a almost daily
absolutely,
basis. Huh?
absolutely,
So, one like to spend time on these to be able to gain.
absolutely, sir. We'll
Huh?
do that. Thank you, sir. Jai Hind.
Thanks a lot. Thank you.